I used to carry around this bright blue shopping bag that had my little kit of diabetes stuff. I had my needle and my insulin bottle, and I'm hiding out in bathrooms trying to take shots. And one of the first things the doctor told me was, you can't even walk across the room without shoes on, because he didn't want me to injure my toes and have a sore that wouldn't heal and then, need to get amputated later. So I was very afraid to exercise. And frankly, I was pretty depressed. All it started with was this concept of what if I tried this? And then once I tried the 5K, well, what if I did a 10K? Well, what if I did a marathon length obstacle course race? Well, then what if I did a 24-hour obstacle course race? Or what if I went 25K, 50K, 100K? You just kind of get addicted to that journey.
Today's guest is Eric Dutcher, an American ultra athlete and inspiring advocate for the diabetes community. Eric often describes himself as a chronic superhuman, someone who deliberately chooses extreme physical challenges, not to escape diabetes, but to understand his body and mind more deeply while living with it. Eric's incredible achievements include the Rapa Nui Ultra Marathon on Easter Island, several triathlons, but most notably also an extreme event called the World's Toughest Mudder, a grueling 24-hour obstacle course race featuring unforgiving terrain and extreme elements like ice pits and electric shocks, testing physical limits, mental grit, and teamwork for the ultimate challenge in obstacle course racing. Eric lives with type 1 diabetes and has built a life around endurance, resilience, and curiosity about what humans are capable of when things are hard. His story isn't about chasing records or proving something to others, but about learning how far awareness, preparation, and mental strength can take you, even when your body requires constant attention. In this conversation, we talk about extremes, control, uncertainty, and what diabetes can teach you when you're willing to listen. So Eric, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you very much. And I appreciate the supercharged electrical shock intro.
Yeah, I had to include that. So, how's your day been so far?
Oh, it's great. Today is a holiday in the US, and so I've spent some time with my mom and sister, and it's been a great day.
And how's your glucose?
It's currently high, although oh, look at this. My sensor just expired. So I don't actually know where my sugar is.
Well, that's another task for after the podcast then. Uh,
Right.
so, so, so Eric, in the diabetes community and beyond, you are known as chronic superhuman. How would you describe who you are and what drives you?
I would start by saying I've always looked at myself as the content provider for Chronic Superhuman, but not actually the Chronic Superhuman. I really think that Chronic Superhuman was about developing a movement around recognizing the fact that all of us living with diabetes are chronic superhuman. And the way I got there is, if you think about what diabetes is, you have to operate your body on manual mode. You have to do something extra that all other humans need to do. And extra is a synonym for super. And so you get the super. And the reason why we're doing it is because we've got a chronic illness. So in effect, anyone doing anything living with diabetes is a chronic superhuman. How I still describe myself is just a guy very much like yourself, had a trigger point after living with diabetes for years that caused him to change his life and start getting physical. And it's just led me to where I am today.
Wow. I I'm really interested in learning more about that story because becoming that chronic superhuman is not something that happened overnight, I assume. Were you already that active as a child?
So when I was a child, this is actually, all of this has been a journey back to my childhood. When I was a kid, there's pictures of me growing up. I grew up near a beach town in Houston, Texas. And so there's pictures of me just diving into sand dunes and being covered in dirt. And we would have a mud day at preschool. And so, yeah, I'd be covered in mud making mud pies. But I was always active and had a lot of energy to spend. But I was the guy on the baseball team that played every year, but the US equivalent at the time was a Pete Rose. I was a Charlie Hustle. I would never let anybody on the field out energy me, but boy, they could outplay me because I was never an elite athlete.
So, when did you first get interested in sports, actually, as a child? Was it immediately? Was it something you grew into? Was it something that came from your parents or family?
It was always kind of immediate. My life love of sport is really around basketball, but given that I was 4'8" in middle school, which is, or yeah, it's a lower level school after elementary, I did not have much chance to be a basketball player. So, but growing up, I did 9 years on a swim team, and it was primarily something that my parents did to keep us active during the summer. I did baseball. I always wanted to play football, the global football, soccer in the US, but never got on a team. And so most of my athleticism was really built around college and doing intramural activities. So I could play ultimate frisbee, I could do basketball, I could do flag football, but I never particularly had to be that great. I even tennis was kind of the family sport. So I did a whole bunch of stuff. I just wasn't really that great at any of it.
But yeah, you were an all-round athlete, basically. So, how in the end did you get into things like obstacle course running?
Well, that actually was a trigger point. So, um, my wife Heather and I, several years back, very early in our marriage, we just kind of looked around and whether it was Groupon or looking on the internet for just things that were interesting that we might do together. She found a race called the Survival Race, which sounds just terrifying, but it was really just a 5K, and the obstacles were jumping over a hay bale or traversing through a swampy bit of water. And the fire jump at the end, I think I maybe jumped an inch, but I probably didn't need to. So it was a really light obstacle race, but there was something about that race that as you ran a little bit, you felt a little bit accomplished, but every obstacle along the way, you got this kind of dopamine rush of, hey, I just did that thing. Even if it was small, it was a challenge that I overcame. And by the end of the race, I was hooked. Like obstacle course race, that was the start of my obstacle course racing career. And I've never looked back.
Eric, I really want to talk to you about diabetes, of course, but there's one thing that I'm really curious about before that, and that's this world's toughest mother event that you did, because I find it really fascinating. For people who are unfamiliar with this event, what is it and how does it work?
So, World Toughest Mudder is a party for everyone who really loves doing tough mudders. And it sounds kind of funny to be described as a party, but because everyone's just about as crazy as you are about doing obstacle course races, that's what it becomes. And why I say it's a big party is because there are people that come around the globe, whether they're racing or not, to just hang out during the 24-hour event. The actual race is a 5-mile loop with 20 to 25 obstacles that you do as many times as you can in a 24-hour period. And it's gamified in that like there's certain levels that you get different jerseys that you can wear. So you really have this motivation to kind of keep going. But, it will be 3 a.m. in the morning and you'll be diving into a pit full of ice water and having to go underneath the water and swim for a little bit to get to the other side of the obstacle. So it takes a special kind of crazy to be the type of person that wants to do it.
Yeah, that sounds insane. That's a 24-hour race. So you basically have to keep on doing it for 24 hours, and whoever does the most rounds wins, right?
That's exactly right. And there are some people, that they'll go out, they'll do a lap and then they'll rest back in the tent or hang out at the party and then they'll come back out in the morning and only do like 2 laps. But there's a good part of people that, you're running around at 3 and 4 in the morning talking, having these actually really deep conversations often at 3 and 4 in the morning because you're trying to keep each other awake.
Yeah, because fatigue also plays a big role in that, because 24 hours, that's really, really long, and you have to be active all the time, so you get tired. Yeah. I mean, we will
Sure.
talk about the diabetes management around that. So let's talk diabetes now, and maybe let's go back to the start first of diabetes. Can you maybe take us back to your diagnosis with type 1? How old were you, and what changed for you in that moment?
Sure. When I was 26, I was going through a really stressful time in my life. I was in a previous marriage and there was a lot of stress associated with that. It was an abusive relationship where I was being abused, and on top of it, I was working in a work environment that, while I'm very proud of what I learned at that company, it also was very much high stress, 80 hours a week. Expectations were well beyond what normal expectations should be. And I would get to this period of life where I was just constantly eating and needing to drink things and tired. And I'd go through these moments of irritability and didn't really know what was wrong, and went to a doctor's office and got a glucose test. And sure enough, my blood glucose had been off the charts for months, but I just wasn't aware. And to give you context, I mean, this is American measures, but I'm sure somebody can translate it. I weigh about 165 pounds now. I was about 35 pounds lighter than I am today.
Wow.
And it was all related to the weight loss that had happened with being in chronic high blood sugars.
Yeah. So you were probably also very dehydrated and thirsty all the time. Did you have those symptoms?
Absolutely. Yeah, the
Yeah.
the classic symptoms: frequent urination, constant thirst, unexplained weight loss. So um, I was in the thick of it, and I didn't know what was going on.
So you went to the doctor, got your glucose checked. He basically said it's diabetes. What happened then?
A lot of fear. My life became completely absorbed by diabetes. I became a different person. I can remember just I used to carry around this bright blue shopping bag that had my little kit of diabetes stuff. I had my needle and my insulin bottle, and it felt like the kid's doctor kit, but I always carried it with me, and I'm hiding out in bathrooms trying to take shots. And the most vivid memory that comes to being athletic is one of the first things the doctor told me was, "You can't even walk across a room without shoes on," because he didn't want me to injure my toes and have a sore that wouldn't heal, and then, need to get amputated later. That was kind of how the impression was placed upon me. So I was very afraid to exercise. And frankly, I was pretty depressed.
And how long did it take before you found some more control over your diabetes, or when did you when did you actually think about, yeah, doing more active things again? Was there a turning point for you, or because everybody, yeah, as you say, the doctor said no, it was impossible. When did that change for you?
It was a long journey. I I think there's a, you know, I think it's important to share that my journey was not linear. My journey was very impacted by who was around me. Specifically, the abusive relationship. One of the ways that the abuse manifested was over control, and so I was being convinced that an insulin pump wouldn't be good for me and a sensor wouldn't be good for me, even though this technology is coming out around the same time. Um, just because she didn't want that stuff in my life. And it was this kind of control thing. So it really wasn't until I was able to extract myself from the negative surroundings that I was in, and go through the divorce process, that I was able to really start taking control of the diabetes for myself and living for myself, and go on this journey of exploring what is potentially possible with diabetes. And that's so I went through a divorce, and then I went through counseling. And on the other side of counseling, I met my wife, Heather, and she was the one that really kind of said, well, what if we took the perspective of, instead of I can't do this, to what if I did this? And once you take that flip of the mindset to what if I'm going to go forward and doing this, what are the things I need around me? Then you've already kind of taken a step in the direction of making a change in your life. And now it's just about figuring out, how do you step well?
Yeah. I want to thank you for your honesty and openness talking about this, because I can imagine it's not easy to look back at that, I would say, darker period in your life. But it's also encouraging to see that at the end, you found a way to get out of that and to change your perspective. I really, I really, I really find that admirable, because that's not something easy. It's something that requires a lot of time and energy, and yeah, you have to really turn your life around. So how how did you do that? How was it, the support team? So you said your new wife Heather. Did you have other people in your life who supported you with that?
Sure. Once I got out of being isolated and I was able to open up and meet other people in the community and really lean into, physician care, that endocrinologists that want to figure out diabetes and exercise, and finding other people in the community, in the diabetic online community. Once people started, or I created an environment where people could speak into my life that were heading in positive directions. Once I created that environment, I found there was all this support and all this help that was available to me all the time. But perhaps because I was locked where I was, or I didn't think that there was something better for me, or I didn't know that there were other options. Because I didn't have any of that, I didn't ever get exposed to it. But once I removed the barriers from my life, those things started showing up in big ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you started getting active again, but you don't just stay active. You deliberately chose extreme endurance challenges. Why is that?
Um, Probably because I'm just a broken individual that believes that what I do matters on who I am. There's a certain level of, like, anyone that's done the Enneagram, you can look it up. There's a person called a performer, and that's an Enneagram 3, and that's me. I feel like when I do something, when I accomplish something, I feel like that makes me worthy. It also is what makes me broken when I think about it unhealthily. But really, what it was once you start doing something once, the question always comes, well, what are you going to do next? And even now, you know, even I'm doing these ridiculous races, and one of the questions is always going to be, well, what are you going to do next? And next to me always meant going further, going farther, doing something different. But to me, all it started with was this concept of what if, what if I tried this? And then once I tried the 5K, well, what if I did a 10K? Well, what if I did a marathon length obstacle course race? Well, then what if I did a 24-hour obstacle course race? Or what if I went 25K, 50K, 100K?
There's
You
no
just
limit.
kind of get addicted to that journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I do recognize that in a way. I'm always thought that I wanted to prove myself a bit more than other people because I think diabetes played a big role in that because I just wanted to show people that, I can do this with diabetes. And that pushed me to go further and do more extreme things than maybe other people would do. Is that also something that you recognize? The fact that you maybe want to prove yourself more than other people?
It's not been that way for me per se, but I totally understand where you're coming from. Like the fact of, you're going to put this barrier in front of me and I'm just going to blow through that barrier and I'm going to show you how far. The way I look at it for me is almost more like people feel like diabetes is in the driver's seat often. They feel like diabetes has them. But I like to flip that script and say, I have diabetes and I'm in the driver's seat. So it's a lot of fun to determine what I'm going to subject diabetes to. And it actually does work out that way eventually, because what you find is sometimes when you're doing something that's so monumentally difficult, diabetes is just such a small part of it.
Yeah, and that's something I hear from a lot of athletes actually that, you know, they're at the top in their sport. Diabetes can't be a big part of their race, for instance, because they have to focus on doing their sport the best way they can, to perform at their best. So diabetes has to become smaller, and that's only possible if you're in the driver's seat, if you are in control, and if you know how to control it. Or also, I feel that you have to be able to relax a little bit because sometimes, even though you have good control, diabetes will throw a curveball at you. And it doesn't help if you get totally stressed out about it and you'll get angry about it. You can get angry about it. Of course, I feel that, but it doesn't help at that point in such a race. You just have to deal with it. In such an event, you just have to deal with it. You have to find a way to deal with it, stay calm, and yeah, find a way, find a solution. So I think that diabetes in that way also helps to accept certain things in life and deal with things in life. Do you have do you think diabetes teaches you how to live your life better?
I have no doubt that when I first got diagnosed with diabetes, if I hadn't, um, I may not have, I may not still be here, to be frank. It forced me to focus in on myself. You can't, you can't overperform for somebody else if you're just knocked on your back because of diabetes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's important to know that even people looking at me as an elite athlete, I'd had both success and failure in this journey, either on a small or an elite level. I know, one race for World's Toughest Mudder 1 year. So I've done World's Toughest 3 times. 1 year, I had to get medevaced out. I was coming up on an obstacle. It was, 10:30 at night. I'd been racing for 10 hours and I had a pod fall off. And when I put the new pod on, I didn't realize that I had it not, I had to re engage activity mode. And so I had been giving myself too much insulin all the time. Well, I approached an obstacle. I could tell I was super low. And the only thing I could think of was getting medevac to go get something to raise my blood sugars. Well, in my kit that I was carrying, I had low blood sugar supplies, but my brain wasn't there enough. And so I got medevaced out. So that's a failure. But on the other side, I've had a success where, on the 100K that I did, I was very close to, tapping out on that race. I thought I was just too tired. It was probably hour 22 that I was in that race, or 20, probably hour 20 of that race that I had been running. And I felt just so tired. And I was getting into an aid station and I'm trying to talk myself through what are the things, why could I be tired? Well, maybe because I've been running for 20 hours. But another reason why I could have been tired was high blood sugar. And sure enough, I had high blood sugar and I was able to give myself a little bit of insulin and I was able to finish the 100K race. So I think diabetes, you can't ignore it. It can make you stronger. It can make you a different person. But I also think that it can be hazardous to say, yes, you should try to go do everything right away with diabetes. I think it's more, let yourself wonder, let yourself explore, let yourself discover what you can possibly do with diabetes and
Yeah.
keep discovering and don't stop.
Yeah. And that requires a lot of trial and error. Like you say, you call it failures, but in a way, the next time that won't happen again to you. I mean, something else may happen, but you will check the next time that your activity mode is on because it's something you had to learn, something that happened, and you will learn from it for the next time. And I had a lot of times when I just had very bad hypos, bad hypers, and usually afterwards I was just checking and saying, why did that happen? And sometimes you can't really find a reason, okay? Sometimes diabetes is pretty random, but sometimes you can say, okay, maybe I should try to change something in my carbs or change something in my insulin. And let's see next time until you find a system that works for you for the activities that you do. Because as you say, diabetes has to become smaller if you do these kind of events. But that can only happen if you have something, a system or habits or things that you do every time that you can rely on. What is your strategy for managing diabetes when you do these types of events?
Gosh, there's a lot that I've learned over time. I think the first and foremost is start as an athlete. Um, Oftentimes, the things that you need as an athlete will take care of diabetes in and of itself, or the reason why you're going to bonk out of a race or not be able to go as far as you want to go is something to do with your athletic mindset as opposed to your diabetes preparation. So, I think that's a key element. So I remember just being able to walk through some scenarios of, hey, I know this is going to be really long and I'm going to be tempted to just want to step aside because um I'm just bored. I mean, honestly, running straight marathons after, a while, that gets boring to me, right? There's got to be something. So you've got to think, okay, when I get bored, what is going to be my mental approach towards that boredom? So sometimes it's just something like that. But the rest is really, I've learned a lot through interaction in the community. One of the people I admire a lot is Don Mucho. He's T1 determined. He's the guy that ran from Disney World to Disneyland. But a lot of what he taught me in the time that I ran alongside him was really around, if you create the situation that you possibly might get exposed to, then you're going to be better prepared. So I think about when I go trail run, oftentimes when I'm just training on trail running, I'll I'll think through ahead of time, okay, I'm going to, on this training run, I'm always going to turn right, because if my GPS goes down and if I start to get lost, I can always find my way back by coming to the trails and taking a left, right? It's just simple things that, the more I don't train for distances, I train for circumstances. So I want to find a situation where I've got too much insulin on board. I want to find a situation where I've overeaten and raised my sugar high. I want to find a situation where race stress has led me to be high, because oftentimes, if you've already done the solution once, you can figure it out the second time.
Yeah, that's taking preparation to a whole new level, I would say, because that's basically deliberately creating situations where things go wrong, but in training to make sure that you're prepared for them, yeah, during the actual event.
Well, and diabetes, we don't have to deliberately cause a problem. Like, it just does
No,
it for us. If you're just out there, it's gonna do it for you.
it will happen at some point, and the longer you are active and the longer you've been training, yes, the more things you will experience, and the more, yeah, the more of these things will happen to you. Indeed, yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, that I think what is really hard for people, especially starting out, is the newness factor. Anytime we start running, start walking, start kayaking, start biking, anytime you're doing a new sport, your body, the first two, three times, isn't really going to know how to handle it. You're not going to necessarily know how the insulin will work and whatnot, but your body is not going to be as efficient. So you can do the same thing the first time you do it and the fifth time you do it, and you're going to have better success the fifth time you're doing it, just because your body's learning it. But oftentimes, like, let's say that somebody's a runner and then they want to do a triathlon. That first time they start the bike training, they're going to go, I can't bike because I keep getting low no matter what I do. I've got no insulin on board. I'm loading carbs, and I still end up with lows all the time. You got to give your
Yeah.
body time to learn the new sports every time.
And also accept a level of uncertainty, I think, because extreme endurance often means accepting uncertainty. How do you balance planning your diabetes management with letting go of control?
I'd like to say that I'm not a control freak, but I like to control a whole lot of stuff. So I really think it's about creating options. If you think about us as adaptive athletes, we're adapting to the fact that we have to control our sugar on a manual level. If you start in advance of and dealing with these uncertainties by saying, okay, if my blood sugar goes low, what are the things that I can do? I can tell you, I had one race. It was just a training run where I was running out on a trail. It was an extra hot day. I got, I was still 3 miles from my vehicle. I used up all of my low blood glucose, tricks. And the way, I'm literally looking to the side of the trails going, okay, which of these grasses is not poisonous, is not going to cause a rash, and may have some carbs in it? Kind of a crazy thought. And what I ended up doing was I had remembered that oftentimes if you are stressing your body harder, that it will cause a spike in blood sugar. And so what I would do is every 5 minutes, I would sprint for a minute and then I would let it go. And I ended up finishing that 3 miles by really just going back and forth on the intensity of my exercise. But the only way I knew that that was an option for me is because I had experienced it and I had tested it in training before.
Yeah. Yeah. I recognize that. I have a very similar story. I went out on a ride, my bike to my parents. It was like, I think 30 kilometers, about 20 miles away. And it wasn't long. So I hadn't really thought about putting any gels. But I usually do. So I usually have them the back of my back pocket of my jersey. And I was riding and I was also, I think 2 miles away from my parents, 3 miles. And I reach for my gel and I see, oh geez, I don't have any. I don't have any. And I get stressed at first, but then I remembered I had a lecture just a few days before from an endocrinologist who was talking about exactly what you're saying. You know, if you do sprints, you do anaerobic exercise, if you do these short bouts of very, very hard sprints, you can actually stabilize or even, yeah, increase your glucose. So I thought, okay, what the hell? Nothing else to do. No shops open. It was Sunday. So I did that. And I actually I came in with stable glucose. So it was really on the edge of very low, but I came in with stable glucose. The only caveat there is I didn't really feel like doing sprints when I was going down because you generally don't feel like doing the sprints, but at that time it worked. And like you say, it's an emergency option that you have. You know, you can always try something, but you need to know. If you don't know, you can't use that option that you have at your disposal.
Yeah, you need like option A, B, C,
Yeah.
D, E, F. And like I think I was on option F and option G would
Yes,
like call
indeed.
911, right? So like I don't want anyone walking away for the podcast going, oh yeah, if you're running low, just all of a sudden like start sprinting and you're gonna be fine. But like make
Yeah,
sure
go
you
train without
kids
sugar.
don't
No,
try
no,
this
no,
at
no.
home.
No, indeed, indeed. So apart from the physical, there's also a clear mental side to diabetes. Would you say that diabetes has shaped your mental toughness in ways that maybe non-diabetic athletes might never experience? Because you know a lot of athletes who have type 1 diabetes. You even coach athletes with type 1 diabetes. Do you think there's some there's more mental toughness in them?
Um, I want to start by saying diabetes makes me really angry a lot, as opposed to necessarily creating mental toughness. Like, I want to acknowledge that. Like, I think a lot of people look at us and they're like, ah, they don't care about diabetes because they're mentally tough and they figure it out. Diabetes makes me angry a lot. I get diabetes burnout a whole lot. And it's just one of those things. But I will say what it's done is it has made me more aware of all the things that can impact you, and can impact somebody else. I think we have the opportunity to be a lot more empathetic than other athletes. And I think we can adapt to changing environments. I listened to your podcast with the golfer, and she's like, It's very much like the golf ball could go anywhere because that's just golf. It's, our blood sugar could go anywhere. You know, it's just diabetes. So I don't know that it's necessarily made me mentally tough, but it has definitely made me more flexible.
Yeah. And has it, do you think, because you've done these great things and you've done them with diabetes and actually also because of diabetes in a way, has diabetes, you think, expanded what you believe that you're capable of?
Yes, for sure. Because I don't think I would have gone this far, this journey without trying to take that attitude of I'm going to take diabetes to some really cool places and see what happens. I don't think I would have had that mindset without diabetes. And it's been a journey, really starting out from just what does it look like to walk around the block and carrying a big backpack to just walk around the block to I've done some races where I don't carry much of anything, but it took a long way to get there. But it didn't I never thought I'd be here, sitting here talking about doing ultra distance marathons. I never had it in my head to become an elite athlete. I still, to this day, don't think of myself as an elite athlete, but I've done some pretty cool things because I've just said, where can I take diabetes today?
Yeah, and I admire you for that because you push boundaries and you engage in these extreme challenges, but you're also very aware of your body. And how do you approach risk responsibly? Because some people will probably think when they hear you talk like that's risky, that's dangerous what he does. What's your approach to risk?
I have a healthy appreciation for risk, and I'm generally aware of most of the risks that I face. When I go to races that I'm in, I do typically identify as a type 1 diabetic to the medical team. I'm also hearing impaired, and so I try to put that on my jersey somewhere as well, just in case, somebody's trying to hail me for some reason and I can't hear them. But it's really about, the more that I've trained or the more that I've thought about the circumstances, the better I understand the risk. The ultra marathon I did in Rapa Nui, I had a good conversation with the medical staff in advance. They had all the supplies that I needed. Should something bad or, go very difficult, I usually carry the rescue nasal inhaler with me in any race that I go to. And there'll be times when I'm, I generally race alone, which is also a bit riskier than some people. I don't have uh, friends that like to do the things that I like to do. So I end up doing them, I'll travel around the world and make new friends at the place that I go to.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's just really about if you understand what the risks are and you work through what are the mitigations and you try to let people around you know what your limitations are, then the risk becomes manageable. But I do think each person has to walk that line of you don't want to be super risky day one. You want to kind of push into the challenges and push into, what is the next acceptable level of risk that I can take rather than just, I'm going to go out there.
Yeah, because alongside your athletic challenges, you're also very active in the diabetes community. When did you first realize that sharing your story mattered just as much as doing the challenges themselves?
I was very early in my athletic journey, and I ran into the Diabetes Sports Project event. They had a group getting together for the Sacramento International Marathon, so California International Marathon in Sacramento, and there was a group there that ran, and just being in that event with other diabetics, I kind of looked around and I was like, wow, there's people that do this. There's people that have walked this path before that I can start learning from, and having that exposure to additional people that were kind of trying to push the limits. Or I mean, some of those athletes, they were, way beyond what my capabilities were. And just knowing that at the end of the day, one of the reasons why I brought up the fact that I race alone is that's probably one of the biggest limits to what I can possibly accomplish is when we have someone alongside of us, someone that can journey with us, that we can just kind of bounce ideas off of, that we can get shared mental toughness, that we can get shared training experience together, that is what will propel us forward more than anything else. And so that led me to what if I helped be alongside others who wanted to start an exercise journey or level up their exercise journey? What can I do to help?
Yeah, but I think many people with type 1 diabetes, when they listen to you, they will think, wow, that's great what Eric's doing, but I could never do that myself. I mean, how do you balance inspiring people without creating pressure to do extreme things?
I think this is one of the hardest things to have a conversation about because, again, I'm still the guy that was just sitting on the couch afraid to walk around the block. That's me. I've never been an elite athlete, right? In my mind. And so I didn't know that I could be where I was or where I am today if I didn't just start walking a path and see how far it goes. And I do think that it's very important for us as people living with diabetes that are doing athletic feats to not push ableism on people, because there are people today that like they're battling diabetes burnout so much that the concept of, signing up for a 5K is just too hard. But there are other people that are battling diabetes burnout that could sign up for a 5K, and the process of starting to walk towards completing a 5K may actually help with that burnout. So it's a really good question because it's really hard to unpack. I don't want to push anyone further than what they want to go, but that's what coaching is about. It's about helping the person explore what is it that they want to establish as a goal and what is the next best step towards that goal.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I've done Ironman, and people often contact me and they ask me about simple things about running. They just want to walk more, or they want to their child is going swimming and they has type 1 diabetes and they don't know really how to manage around that. Yeah, I can help with all these things. I can share my experience because I've done swimming, I do swimming, I do running, I do cycling. It doesn't mean that they have to do an Ironman, but I'm more than happy to be of help because I know that when I still remember when I was just starting out, like you just said, I was also more of a couch potato at that point, and I was not doing much sports. And it was very hard to get into it and to find a system that works and to go through that phase of trial and error. I still remember that. And I always think if I can share some of my failures, often my failures, maybe I can save these people from having to do all these failures themselves, right? To go through all these bad moments themselves. Maybe they can avoid some of them if I can give them some cues and some guidance. So I see it more like that. I think that's that you can, through your experience, you can help people to get started a little bit more smoothly than I got started. That's usually how I see it.
But no, it's a great way to put it. And we need more people that are ready to answer the questions that I get sometimes, which is how do I feel comfortable with letting my daughter go to a pool party? Then we need people saying, how can I complete a ultra marathon or world's toughest mudder? Because there's more people that are living that day to day of, I'm not sure I feel comfortable enough with, you know, should my son still play basketball in high school now because he just got diagnosed? What do I need to watch for? We really need more people answering those questions, and we need people answering, what does it take to do an ultra marathon?
Yeah, totally agree. That's one of the reasons why I do this podcast. So,
Exactly.
if someone with type 1 diabetes is listening and feels like their world got smaller after diagnosis, what would you want them to hear?
I would first say I can totally understand why the world feels like it's gotten smaller. And it has, because your focused and your vision is now needing to narrow in on something that is brand new, something maybe it's not even brand new. Maybe you're just going through a rough period with your diabetes. And so your world has gotten smaller. So the question is, what can we do in this space where things are smaller to help you find where the next area of growth to help grow your world back is? I think it's very easy to listen to podcasts or be, you know, there's tons of people that say, you can do it, or, don't worry about it. Like there's all these little people that are going to push you out of the darkness that you're feeling. And really, what I want to do is I want to be there with the people in their darkness. I want to sit there in the dark room with them and say, I'm here. I'm with you. I understand. I'm not going to push you out. I'm not going to tell you to go turn on the light. What I'm going to do is say, let's sit in this dark together. Let's let it absorb in. And then maybe we'll see where the light is calling from next. And there's been a real visual part of my life that I remember at one time when I was walking through the woods with my father, who he died at the age of 53. I'm 51 now. It's something I think of very constantly about, how long I might live. But walking through that the woods with him, and I had a flashlight on, and he said, "Son, turn off the light." And I was afraid to turn off the flashlight, but I finally did because he was there with me, and I knew that he wasn't going to let anything bad happen to me. And what I learned was that once that darkness finally consumed me, the light from the moon shone on everything way better than just that little flashlight that I was trying to force my way in a certain direction.
Beautiful moment. You're you're very, very open about the realities of living with type 1 diabetes. You're not sugarcoating it. And that's I think it's very important also to do that. For you, honesty about diabetes is very important. Why is that so important to you, to be honest about diabetes? Because you see a lot of people also online or when people talk about diabetes, they often say, it's not that bad. It's okay. I can deal with it. They're not they're not sharing the bad moments. They're usually only sharing the highlights, but you don't. So why is that so important to you?
I think there's first of all, I want to say there's probably somebody out there and some bodies, multiple, that probably look at diabetes and they're like, it's not that big of a deal. I would say that's just not been my experience. And I would say that there's probably more of us out there that have been. I literally remember a moment of I was going through the divorce. I was living alone. I was laying on a futon, like I had, I was buried in debt. I was laying on a futon. I'm just crying because I'm going through the emotional roller coaster of a low, as well as all of the emotional roller coaster that's going out in my life. And it felt so um, isolated at that moment that I was just stuck by myself. Nobody else experienced everything that I was experiencing in that moment. And it can just lead you to such horrible, dark places that don't feel like, and you start questioning yourself. You're like, why me? Like, why everyone else seems to be able to handle this? Everyone else seems to be able to figure out life. Like, this is what things look like for somebody living with diabetes and they're able to manage. But the reality is there's more of us that are crying on a futon out here than are out there celebrating every victory that they've had. And I think it's important that that message is available to people so you don't feel alone.
Yeah. But also the message, I think, that th- things can be turned around. There is a there is a positive way out of it. It's not easy to find it, but you are the living proof that it is possible to get out of such a bad place and, yeah, see your diabetes in a more positive light, I would say, or use it to do something positive in life. Use that as a force in a way.
Yeah. I sit here today. I've returned to my childhood. I mean, look, I diving into sand dunes and playing around in the mud. Like I don't know how else you describe world toughest mother other than maybe
Yeah.
the electrical shock. But um I'm in the best place. I'm living my best life now, but I never thought that I could say that my life would be better with diabetes than without. And it actually is.
That's a beautiful note. It's really a beautiful thing to say. Eric, it's been amazing to talk to you. I find the things you do incredibly inspiring. But before we go, I would like to end with something I always do with a bit of fun. I have a set of quick fire questions for you, and you can just give me a short answer every time, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay, great. Here goes. What's your favorite hypo snack?
Glucose tab.
Mountains or flat, endless roads?
Give me a mountain any day.
Hyper or hypo? Which do you think is worse?
Hyper because I think it's insidious. You don't necessarily see it right away.
Solitude or shared suffering?
Shared suffering.
Yeah, you often do it alone, but as you said, it's better to share it.
Yeah. Well, and I'm never alone out there on the course. I always am out there with all my new friends.
Music or silence during training and events?
Both.
And if you listen to music, what type of music do you listen to?
Usually give me classic metal, maybe hairband stuff or rap.
What's a moment where you surprised yourself?
Moment where I surprised myself. I don't know that I've actually surprised myself, which I don't know what that says, but
Maybe something you thought you couldn't do, but you did anyway. You managed to do anyway, or an event you started and you thought it's never gonna happen. I'm not gonna be able to do this, and you still did it.
well, I'll tell you what. I thought I could get here, but it was still a pretty big surprise. I did get my 50-mile journey at my last World's Toughest Mudder. Maybe what surprised myself out of it was that it sent me into diabetes or diabetic ketoacidosis and that I was hospitalized. But
Wow.
um, so that's a little surprising.
Was that at the end that you had it, or during the actual event that they had to?
Right after the end of the race, I tried to eat my post race meal and couldn't get my blood sugars down to
Oh,
do it.
but you still managed.
Right.
Data or intuition when it comes to diabetes?
Day to day data during a race, intuition.
What's the hardest part of ultra endurance? Body, mind, or logistics?
I'm gonna go with mind, but I think all three are important.
Have you ever used your diabetes as an excuse?
No. Have I used asthma as an excuse? Yes, I did that in my childhood a lot.
Nice. You did great. How did you experience our conversation?
No, it was good. It was very natural. I think you got a knack for doing this. I appreciate it. I've done um, several of these, and I would say that you're among the top of the hosts that I've met with. So good job.
I, I feel honored. It's just, I find it so much easier to talk to other athletes who have type 1 diabetes because there's a connection, right? We share something. We have similar experiences in life, even though we live in totally different places, we do other things, but this condition that we share, it it has shaped our lives, and we share certain experiences.
I think the world is full now of athletes. We got American footballers, multiple American footballers. You got multiple college basketball, pro basketball, tennis, golf. Like there's not a sport that I can think of that doesn't have some sort of elite diabetic athlete or
Yeah.
athlete living with diabetes in it. So it's been it's been fun to watch their rise.
Yeah, that means there will still be some episodes.
Yes, exactly. You got plenty of people to talk to. So
Yes. So what's still in the cards for you in 2026? Do you have any planned events?
I don't have anything currently planned. The last event I did was the multi-sport ultra in Malta, where I did. It was a 16K run, followed by a 6 mile kayak, followed by a 53K bike.
Impressive.
Yeah.
And if people want to connect with you online, where can they find you?
You can look at Chronic Superhuman on Instagram, or if you're specifically interested in coaching, you can go to dutcherlife.com.
Great. I will add your handle to the show notes. Eric, thank you so much for this conversation. I think what stands out is not just the physical challenges that you take on, but the intention behind them, the way you use endurance, honesty, and visibility to contribute to the diabetes community. Your story shows that pushing limits doesn't have to mean ignoring reality, and that strength can come from awareness as much as effort. Thank you for sharing all that with us today.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for listening to Out of Range, the podcast that shares real stories from athletes living and thriving with type 1 diabetes. I hope today's conversation inspired you to get active, take control, and find your own balance, in sport and in life. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and follow the show, or share it with someone who might benefit from hearing these stories. Every recommendation helps more people with type 1 diabetes discover the power of movement. And in the meanwhile, keep learning, keep moving, and keep your glucose in range.